What happens when the people you love most forget your birthday? One woman's quiet day alone leads to a moment that changes everything, and what her family did next left her reeling. Janet Avery woke up with a flutter of anticipation she couldn't quite suppress. Even at 68, the ritual of her birthday still mattered, a date marked on the calendar, circled in bright red since the first day of the year. The early morning sunlight slipped through the lace curtains, painting golden stripes across the old patchwork quilt. Janet sat up slowly, brushing her silver hair from her forehead, listening for the familiar sounds of the house, the distant tick of the grandfather clock, the creak of floorboards in the hall, the hum of the heater kicking on. She lingered in bed, waiting for the telltale footsteps of her husband, Bob, or the happy shouts of her grandchildren if they were visiting. But the house was silent, holding its breath. Janet glanced at her phone on the nightstand. No new messages. No missed calls. She tried not to let the disappointment settle in. Janet slid her feet into her slippers and made her way down the hallway, the familiar photographs lining the walls. Family reunions, Christmases, her children's weddings, the grandchildren in matching pajamas. She paused at one, her daughter Linda's wedding portrait, and smiled, tracing the glass with her finger. Today, she told herself, would be a good day. She had baked her favorite lemon pound cake last night and set out her best china for afternoon tea, just in case someone decided to visit. In the kitchen, she put on a fresh pot of coffee, humming softly. She checked the calendar. Mom's birthday was written in her daughter's neat script, decorated with stars. She'd talked to Linda 3 days ago. We'll try to stop by, Mom, Linda had promised. The kids have soccer, but we'll figure something out. Janet clung to those words now, repeating them in her mind as she buttered toast and flipped through the morning paper. Bob's empty mug sat by the sink, and his car keys were gone. Janet's heart dipped. She remembered belatedly that he'd mentioned a morning golf game with friends. Just 9 holes, I'll be back by lunch. She smiled to herself, though a tiny ache tugged in her chest. Birthdays were always a balancing act in a big family. Someone's shift at the hospital, someone else's band rehearsal, the endless shuffle of busy lives. By late morning, Janet had arranged a simple bouquet from the garden, set the table with yellow napkins, and put on her favorite blue dress. She checked her phone again. Nothing. To pass the time, she called her sister, Claire, who answered on the second ring. Happy birthday, Jan. Claire's voice was bright and full of affection. Any plans today? Janet hesitated, not wanting to sound needy. Oh, just a quiet day. Maybe the kids will come by. They chatted about old times, shared a laugh about Claire's latest baking disaster, and reminisced about childhood birthdays, homemade cakes, scavenger hunts, giggles in the backyard until the sun went down. Janet's spirits lifted, even as she wondered whether her own children would remember to call. By noon, she'd received a text from her neighbor, Helen. Happy birthday, Janet. Hope it's a special one. Janet smiled and replied with thanks, then returned to the kitchen. She busied herself frosting the lemon pound cake and assembling a plate of cucumber sandwiches. Every few minutes, she glanced out the window at the empty driveway, hoping for the crunch of tires on gravel. Bob called just after 1. Running late, honey. Dave wanted to grab lunch at the club, so I'll be home in a bit. Save me a slice of that cake. Janet's voice stayed cheerful. Of course. Drive safe. She tried not to dwell on the disappointment, telling herself it was fine. The house was just too quiet. She turned on the radio for company, humming along to oldies as she moved through the house, dusting shelves and folding towels, trying to stay busy. Afternoon came and went in slow, measured hours. Janet called her son, Aaron, but got his voicemail. She left a message, just wanted to say hi, hope you're having a good day. Love you. She set the phone down, checked for new messages, and found none. When the doorbell finally rang at 4 o'clock, Janet's heart leapt. She hurried to the door, smoothing her dress, a wide smile on her face. But it was the mail carrier, holding out a handful of bills and a catalogue. Happy birthday, Mrs. Avery, he said with a grin, then hurried down the steps. Janet forced a smile, thanked him, and carried the mail inside. The clock ticked on. Shadows lengthened across the living room rug. Janet sat at the kitchen table, her tea cooling beside her, staring at the empty chair across from her own. As the evening crept in, Janet's anticipation dimmed, replaced by a quiet ache. She scrolled through old text messages, reread birthday cards from years past, and let the silence settle around her. The phone never rang. No one came. That night, Janet sat alone at the kitchen table, a single slice of lemon pound cake on a china plate, the candles unlit. She sang "Happy Birthday" to herself in a whisper, her voice trembling. For the first time, her special day felt like just another page in the calendar, except lonelier than any before. Janet awoke the next morning with a heaviness in her chest that coffee couldn't shake. Sunlight streamed through the kitchen window, catching on the crumbs left from last night's uneaten cake. She wandered the quiet house, straightening cushions, folding the Afghan on the couch, dusting family photographs on the piano. Her own face, smiling among loved ones, stared back from glossy prints, yet the laughter in those pictures felt impossibly distant. Bob returned late, smelling of cigar smoke and aftershave, his cheeks flushed from an afternoon at the club. He dropped his golf bag in the hall and called out, "Did you save me some cake?" Janet nodded, voice flat. "It's on the counter." He poured himself coffee, glanced at the clock, and offered a quick apology. "We lost track of time. Dave was telling stories. I hope you had a good day." Janet forced a smile. "It was fine. Quiet." He grinned, already distracted by a message on his phone. "Next year, we'll do something special, promise." The words stung more than Janet cared to admit. She busied herself with dishes, scrubbing pans until her hands ached. After lunch, Bob headed for his study, leaving the door half-closed as he called friends and watched television. Later that morning, Linda called, her voice breezy. "Hi, Mom. Sorry we didn't make it yesterday. Soccer ran late, and then the kids were starving. We thought about coming by, but it just got too late." Janet assured her it was no trouble, asking about the game, her grandchildren's classes, their dog's latest escapade. Linda promised, "We'll celebrate soon, maybe next weekend." Janet nodded, her heart squeezing. "Whenever you can, honey. I'd love to see you." The rest of the day moved slowly. Janet called Aaron again, but only got his voicemail. She left another brief message, her voice thinner now, telling herself she was only being silly. She sorted through the pantry, reorganized the spice rack, and repotted a drooping houseplant, anything to fill the silence that settled in corners and crept along the hallways. In the late afternoon, Janet's neighbor Helen dropped by with a bouquet of grocery store tulips. "I noticed all the cars were gone yesterday. Hope you had a nice birthday." Janet smiled, inviting her in for tea. They sat together in the kitchen, talking about weather and neighborhood gossip, the conversation growing more comfortable with every cup. Helen shared a story about her daughter visiting from Florida, laughter filling the room for a few minutes, washing away some of the loneliness. When Helen left, Janet went for a walk around the block, nodding to neighbors, watching children play in driveways. She envied the easy chaos of their lives, the way doors seemed always open, voices carrying across yards. Returning home, she paused by her mailbox. No cards, just advertisements and bills. Dinner was a simple affair, soup from a can, the last slice of cake eaten in silence. Bob emerged from his study only briefly, distracted and tired, mumbling about work. Janet cleared the table, washed the dishes, and wandered from room to room, her own footsteps echoing. Before bed, Janet opened the small box of keepsakes she kept on her dresser, faded birthday cards, pressed violets from her childhood garden, a yellowed note in her mother's careful handwriting. She lingered over each one, drawing comfort from memories even as she mourned the distance now separating her from those she loved. She lay in bed long after the house went dark, listening to Bob's steady breathing, to the distant bark of a neighbor's dog, to the sigh of wind against the windows. For the first time, Janet wondered if this was simply how it would be now, gathering up scraps of love where she could find them, and learning to live with the ache of being left behind. Sunday dawned gray and cold. Janet rose early, craving structure. She set the kettle to boil, swept crumbs from the kitchen floor, and scrolled through her phone out of habit. There were no new texts. She stared at the group chat her children sometimes used, old emojis and cheerful plans blinking up from weeks ago, then closed the app with a sigh. Determined to break the silence, Janet dressed in her best jacket and decided to attend the early service at church. The familiar faces of the congregation greeted her with gentle smiles. Mrs. Winslow squeezed her hand. "Happy belated birthday, Janet. Did the family spoil you rotten?" Janet hesitated, painting on a smile. "It was Quiet. But I'm grateful for another year. During the service, the pastor spoke about community, about making time for those who matter, about the small ways people can lift each other up. Janet felt the words settle inside her like stones, comforting and heavy all at once. She chatted with friends over weak coffee in the parish hall, dodging questions about her celebration and asking after their grandchildren instead. After church, she stopped at the farmer's market for fresh bread and tomatoes. She greeted the vendors by name, pausing for samples and exchanging small talk. The bustle of the market made her feel less invisible, if only for a little while. As she waited in line at the bakery, she spotted her neighbor Helen, who waved her over. "Come by for lunch," Helen insisted. "No excuses." Janet agreed, grateful for the invitation. Helen's home was bright and cluttered, sunlight streaming across the cluttered dining table. Over bowls of soup and thick slices of bread, they shared stories, Helen's travels, Janet's memories of family road trips, funny mishaps from long ago. The conversation was easy, and Janet laughed more than she had in days. Helen pressed a slice of cake into her hand before she left. "Don't let them forget you, Janet. Family gets busy. You have to remind them you're still here." Walking home, Janet let the words tumble in her mind. She stopped at the playground, sitting quietly on a swing as children shrieked and parents corralled them for home. She watched a father push his daughter, their laughter ringing out across the park. For a moment, she allowed herself to remember birthdays past, candles, games, a house full of noise. When Janet returned home, Bob was gone, his car absent from the driveway. On the kitchen counter was a note. "Went to see Dave. Back for dinner." She shrugged, then picked up the phone and dialed Linda. This time, her daughter answered on the second ring. "Hi, Mom. Sorry, can I call you back in a bit? We're on the way to soccer and running late." Janet kept her voice steady. "Of course, honey. Just wanted to hear your voice." "Love you," Linda replied, distracted. "Love you too, Mom." The line went dead. Janet sat quietly at the kitchen table, hands folded in her lap. She thought about calling Aaron, but couldn't muster the energy. Instead, she wrote a short letter, just a few lines about her day, the nice service at church, a funny story Helen had told. She left the letter on her writing desk, uncertain if she would send it or simply keep it as a record of this odd, lonely weekend. Evening fell. Bob returned, complaining about a headache and heading straight to bed after dinner. Janet watched an old movie, but couldn't follow the plot. When the credits rolled, she sat in the dim light, listening to the wind in the trees and the creak of the old house settling around her. She went to bed, pulling the quilt up to her chin. For the first time in a long while, Janet whispered a quiet wish, not for gifts or parties, but for the simple, stubborn hope that someone might remember her without needing to be reminded. The new week began with rain tapping steadily at the windows. Janet woke to the sound, feeling cocooned and restless all at once. She made oatmeal, poured a second cup of coffee, and sat by the window watching the drops trace winding paths down the glass. The lemon cake was nearly gone now. A small wedge sat under plastic wrap on the counter, growing drier with each day. Bob left early for a doctor's appointment, promising to pick up groceries on his way home. The door closed behind him, and Janet felt the emptiness expand. She spent the morning tidying the guest room, sorting old linens, and stacking books for donation. Every so often, she paused to check her phone. Still no messages, no missed calls. Late in the morning, Janet's neighbor Helen called. "Do you want to come with me to the library? There's a new book club meeting." Janet hesitated, but agreed. She changed into a fresh sweater and met Helen at the curb, grateful for the invitation. The library was warm and bustling, the smell of coffee and paper filling the small community room. The group was a lively mix, retirees, young mothers, a few high schoolers seeking extra credit. They discussed a mystery novel, everyone chiming in with opinions and laughter. Janet joined the conversation, surprising herself with a story about her own long-ago trip to Paris. She felt lighter as she left, Helen patting her arm. "We'll go again next week." Back home, the house felt less oppressive. Janet put on music, something lively, and swept the kitchen, singing under her breath. She called Linda, who picked up after 3 rings. "Hi, Mom. Sorry, the week got away from us again. I've been meaning to call." Janet smiled, pushing down her frustration. "It's all right. How are the kids?" Linda shared quick updates, homework battles, a lost soccer cleat, an upcoming recital. Janet listened, offered advice, and said she'd love to see everyone soon. After they hung up, Janet texted Aaron, sending a silly photo of her and Helen at the library, along with a note, "Miss you. Call your old mom when you get a chance." She didn't expect a reply, but checked her phone a dozen times anyway. In the afternoon, Bob returned with groceries and news from his doctor. Just routine checkups, nothing alarming. He handed Janet a small bouquet of daisies from the supermarket. "Thought you could use some color in here." Janet arranged them in a vase, touched by the gesture. Dinner was simple but pleasant. They sat together at the table, talking about Helen's stories, the book club, and Bob's plans to fix the shed roof when the rain stopped. For a little while, the house felt full, if not of people, then of warmth and possibility. As the rain eased, Janet stood at the door, breathing in the scent of damp earth and blooming lilacs. She thought of all the ways a person could be remembered, through a call, a card, a plate of cookies, or simply a story shared over coffee. She went to bed that night feeling a little less alone, determined to keep reaching for joy, even if it came in small, unexpected ways. Thursday morning arrived with a burst of sunshine. Janet opened the windows to let in fresh air, the curtains billowing softly as birds chirped in the garden. Energized, she decided to bake a batch of chocolate chip cookies, the recipe Linda loved as a child. She packed half the cookies into a tin, wrapped it in bright paper, and wrote a short note, "Thinking of you. Love, Mom." After lunch, she walked to the post office to send the package to Linda's family. On the way home, Janet stopped at the pharmacy for vitamins and browsed the greeting cards aisle. She bought a few, just because, cards, planning to send them to old friends and her sister, Claire. She hoped small gestures might remind others, and herself, that she was still here, still caring, still connected. Back at home, she called Aaron once more. This time, he answered. "Hi, Mom. Sorry I missed your call. Things have been wild at work." Janet's relief was obvious. "I just wanted to hear your voice. I miss you." Aaron promised to visit next week, and they talked for nearly half an hour about his job, his friends, and the possibility of a fishing trip together. After the call, Janet felt lighter, hopeful, even. Helen stopped by in the afternoon, arms full of library books and 2 cups of coffee from the bakery. They sat in the sunroom, reading and chatting about the latest mystery novel, sharing memories and jokes. Janet told Helen about her efforts to reconnect with her children, how difficult it felt not to be needed as much as before. "Sometimes you have to make the first move," Helen said. "Kids don't mean to drift away, but life happens. Remind them what they're missing." Encouraged, Janet emailed Linda a few old family photos, picnics in the park, a snowman building contest, last year's Thanksgiving dinner, with a message. "Remember these days? Let's make more memories soon." Later that day, Bob invited Janet to join him for a walk around the neighborhood. The air was fragrant with lilac and cut grass. They passed neighbors working in gardens, kids riding bikes, dogs barking behind fences. Bob reached for Janet's hand. "You're a good mom," he said quietly. "They know it, even if they forget to say so." That night, Janet set the table for 2, but added a small vase of daisies, a reminder that, even on quiet nights, there was still beauty to be found. After dinner, she sat at her desk, writing postcards to friends she hadn't seen in years, determined to keep her own light shining, however small. As she got ready for bed, her phone pinged, a new message from Linda, with a picture of her grandchildren, faces sticky with chocolate from the cookies Janet had sent. The caption read, "They say thank you, Grandma. Love you so much." Janet smiled, her heart swelling with relief and gratitude. She climbed under the covers, letting hope wrap around her like the old quilt her mother once made. For the first time in days, she slept soundly, dreaming not of what was missing, but of all the ways love returned, unexpected and sweet. Saturday dawned cool and bright, sunlight glinting off dew-speckled grass. Janet awoke to the chirp of a text message, Helen inviting her to the farmer's market. Janet replied yes, then lingered over coffee, reading Linda's message from the night before one more time. She felt buoyed, anticipation stirring inside her. At the market, Janet and Helen strolled between stalls bursting with fresh produce, homemade jams, and cheerful chatter. Janet picked up a bundle of wildflowers and a loaf of crusty bread, laughing as Helen haggled for strawberries. They met friends from church, exchanged recipes, and caught up on town news. For a while, the ache of loneliness faded beneath the simple pleasures of community. On the way home, Helen insisted they stop at the bakery. While Janet browsed pastries, she heard someone call her name. Turning, she saw Linda, smiling, hair swept up, the children tugging at her hand. For a moment, Janet blinked, convinced she was imagining it. "Mom, we wanted to surprise you," Linda said, hugging Janet tight. The children crowded in, clamoring for hugs and stories about the market. Janet's heart raced as they returned to the house together. Linda unpacked groceries while the kids explored the garden, and Bob joined them from his workshop, surprised but delighted. Janet made tea, set out cookies, and soon the kitchen buzzed with laughter and voices, stories, games, the easy chaos of family returning home. They ate lunch in the sunroom, passing dishes and sharing memories. Linda apologized for missing Janet's birthday. "We let life get too busy. I'm sorry, Mom." Janet smiled, brushing away tears. "You're here now. That's all that matters." After lunch, Linda handed Janet a small gift bag. Inside was a framed photograph of all of them at last summer's reunion, the children grinning in her lap. On the back, Linda had written, "Never too busy to love you. Happy birthday, Mom." The afternoon slipped by in a haze of board games and garden walks. Linda promised they would visit again soon, and the kids begged to stay longer. When it was time to leave, Janet held them all close, breathing in the scent of their hair, their laughter ringing in her ears long after the car drove away. That night, Janet watered the garden in the fading light, a quiet peace settling in her chest. She placed the new photo on her nightstand, beside cards and keepsakes from birthdays past. As she drifted off to sleep, Janet felt whole, her heart patched up by the simplest gift of all, being remembered and loved. The following week, Janet found herself moving with renewed energy. She baked bread for the first time in months, clipped flowers for the kitchen table, and started a new puzzle Helen had given her. The echo of last weekend's laughter lingered in every room. The framed family photo beside her bed became a touchstone. Each morning and night, she smiled at the memory it held. Bob, too, seemed lighter. He whistled while tending the yard, inviting Janet to join him for coffee breaks on the porch. In the evenings, they watched old movies together, Janet's hand curled in his. Sometimes they spoke of the visit, replaying moments, sharing what had moved them most. One afternoon, Janet received a call from Aaron. True to his word, he had taken a few days off work and wanted to come for dinner. Janet buzzed with anticipation, planning his favorite roast and apple pie. She polished the silver, set the table with care, and dug out old photo albums to show him. Aaron arrived just as the sun dipped low, hugging his mother tightly at the door. He handed her a bouquet of sunflowers, her favorite. Over dinner, they talked about everything and nothing. Stories from Aaron's childhood, Janet's garden, funny memories of family vacations. Bob joined in, adding jokes and teasing both of them. After dessert, they gathered in the living room. Janet brought out the photo albums, and together they lingered over pictures of birthdays, holidays, and ordinary days. Aaron, a little misty-eyed, thanked his mother for always saving those memories. "I know we get caught up in our lives, Mom," he said, "but you're the center of this family. Even if we forget to show it sometimes." They hugged long and tight before he left. Janet stood on the porch, watching his taillights disappear down the street, the summer night alive with crickets and soft breeze. She returned inside, heart swelling with gratitude for the connections that, though stretched, still held strong. The days after Aaron's visit passed in a gentle rhythm. Janet continued writing notes to friends, attending book club with Helen, and watering the lilies that now bloomed wildly along the fence. Each morning, she texted Linda or Aaron, sharing photos of her garden or the weather, and each evening she found herself feeling less invisible. One night, as Janet tucked herself into bed, she reached for the family photo. She studied each face, realizing that the ache of her birthday had softened. It hadn't disappeared, but it no longer felt like the center of her story. She lay in the dark, listening to Bob's steady breathing beside her, and whispered a quiet thank you, to her family, to her friends, and to herself for holding on, even when love felt far away. The last days of summer drifted gently into fall. Janet found herself savoring the little things, the first bite of a crisp apple, the gold slant of afternoon sun through the living room window, the creak of the porch swing as she read letters from friends. She called Linda to ask about the kids' school projects, texted Aaron a recipe for his favorite soup, and sent Helen a thank-you note for the book she'd lent. One Saturday, Janet hosted a simple lunch, inviting Helen, a few neighbors, and even Mrs. Winslow from church. The kitchen filled with voices and the scent of fresh bread. Everyone brought something: a casserole, a pie, homemade pickles. Janet's table had never looked more welcoming. Laughter echoed through the house, rising above the clink of dishes and the shuffle of chairs. After everyone left, Janet sat in the quiet, feeling the afterglow of warmth and community. She picked up the family photo from her nightstand, gazing at the familiar faces, and for the first time she did not feel the sting of absence. Instead, she felt steady, rooted in the love that reached her, even if sometimes imperfectly, even if not always on the days she wished. As the leaves began to turn, Linda called to ask if she and the children could visit for a Sunday dinner. Janet said yes, already picturing the kitchen full of voices, her heart swelling with anticipation rather than hope. On the morning of their visit, Janet woke early, humming as she made pancakes and cut flowers for the table. When Linda's car pulled into the driveway, the children ran up the walk, arms wide for hugs. Bob smiled from the porch, watching it all. Dinner was noisy and happy, with stories and jokes and a small, impromptu celebration. No reason this time, just family, together. After everyone had gone, Janet tidied the kitchen and stood for a long time at the window, watching the last light fade behind the trees. She realized she was not alone, not truly, not on her birthday or any other day. The ache of that lonely afternoon was still part of her, but it no longer ruled her. Janet had discovered new ways to fill her life, with kindness, with reaching out, with the stubborn, simple act of loving again and again. She climbed into bed, the house quiet around her, and closed her eyes with a peaceful certainty. In the morning, there would be new calls, new visits, new small joys. For now, Janet allowed herself to rest, her heart mended not by grand gestures, but by the steady, everyday return of love.